I'm back. Welcome back. My name is Sean, and today we're going to be getting into the beginning after the end, book 7, Divergence. So this was an interesting book for me to get through. Turtleme has absolutely gotten better as a writer. Some of the tricks that he was pulling off on this is definitely speaking to the experience that he is gaining and getting better at. But I kind of wonder if that is actually hurting the series as a whole, just because my subjective experience with this book wasn't the best. I enjoyed the series. I enjoyed the book. I liked how he is improving and stuff, but I wouldn't say that it was my favorite entry in the series, which is weird because I think it may have been the best written book in the series. That being said, I think that this book needed to happen the way that it happened for the series as a whole to finish strong, which puts it in like a weird mental spot for me. And part of this I think has a lot to do with just my subjective experience of the book. This book took me a bit longer to get through, but I think some of the criticisms and praise that I have are fair and stands to the point. Now, I was super excited to get into this book. At the end of the very last book, we were left on a bit of a cliffhanger. We have the big confrontation with Arthur and Agrona. He had just broken into the White Core stage, and Sylvie managed to finally get her human form. And they have this confrontation where you find out that Agrona not only is playing the cards very well, but he also knows that Arthur is actually King Grey, and doesn't quite explain how, but we have had some hints leading up on there that there is a hidden player that has been going around and acting as a foil to our main character. Going into this book, we get thrown directly into the conflict for Dicathin. We get to see Arthur experience a lot of tragedy, hold the wall, actually start performing in his lance capacity, especially with his newfound White Core power. We dive way more into his past, and that was actually one of the highlights of this book for me. Get to really see like how Arthur became that shoddy little orphan that had some natural talent to becoming someone who could actually outduel everyone and become like King Grey. And during the conflict for Dicathin, we're seeing him pitched against Scythes, all these new characters that seem to be way more overpowered than him, and get to see his finally conflict with that hidden character. And we finally get to see that big conflict towards the end where everything just gets tied back together. So just as a disclaimer, I think that one of the reasons that I didn't think this book was my favorite was simply my subjective experience of actually reading it. Normally I am like in one location, I can read a book, I can take notes on it, and then I can put all my thoughts together in this routine that I have, and I can just really dial in and focus on the book itself because my environment and subjective experience of things happening around me, is pretty steady. I was reading this through the holiday, so I had to factor in the fact that I was traveling a lot, drinking a lot to, do the whole family thing and do the holiday thing. This year I was doing a fair bit of traveling too, so I was listening to this book while I was on a plane seated next to babies at like 2 a.m. So all of this factors in, and this week of actually recording it when I'm trying to put my thoughts together, I actually lost a pet, and that also plays into how I view pretty much everything. So if I am more negative towards this than I want to be, I apologize ahead of that. But as a YouTuber and someone who's doing this video, all I can do is give my subjective take on it. That being said, I'm trying to be fairly objective, and I've written everything out, so I have a bit of a framework of things that I want to talk about, the pros and the cons, and overall just what my impression of this book was and where I think the series is going as a whole. So also warning, spoilers are ahead. I'm not going to go into really minute detail for anything. I will talk about some major plot points and some of the big reveals that happen in this book, so don't watch this if you don't want that spoiled. But we're book 7 in the review, so I'm assuming that you've already read this and now you're just looking to see what my reaction of the book is. But without further ado, let's dive in. Now, some of the positives for this book for me, because I want to start positive with this, is that I really enjoyed some of the small moments that I had nested in there. There is a lot of trauma that happens in this book, between Tess making terrible tactical mistakes that cost the lives of many, to Arthur losing his father, and how they decided to handle that, and the grief that they actually injected in there, I thought was pretty well done. Having these like small moments where characters are having to overcome these terrible things that happen to them, and they're not just like, oh, terrible thing happened to me, I'm just gonna push forward, and instead react to it. And you have these like small tender scenes going between the characters and having them try to cope and deal with that grief. I thought was a pretty nice touch. This definitely speaks to the skill of Turtleme as a writer. I don't think he would have been able to pull that off in the first, book or two. It's a hard thing of trying to convey that desolation and that irrationality that comes when you're dealing with that type of trauma and loss. And while I wasn't a huge fan of the way that this was set up, I did enjoy that revenge wish fulfillment that we had, where we had Arthur confront Proteus Flamesworth at the end of a betrayal. Definitely some cold shit. He just went straight for it, and that's one thing that we're seeing more and more of Arthur, is that he has this really cold, callous person inside of him. So when it becomes time to do some really dark things, he is more than capable of just shutting off like that kind empathy part of his brain and going straight lizard brain, terrible, salting the earth type of revenge, and having him reap the sheer consequences of the actions in a very, very brutal way. I did enjoy that part to the point where I remember being annoyed at the setup, but then the execution payoff was so good that I was like, alright, this works out. The King Gray arc too, I actually was probably the most compelled by this and, the last little bit of the book, the last 15%. But I found myself really enjoying the King Gray arc. We're back to dystopian Earth, technically in more of a futuristic setting. And even though that we know that Gray becomes king and he dies and gets reincarnated into this new world of Decathlon, it was really cool to see them actually world build out, and it's one of the reasons why I'm going to be excited to see that if turtleme starts a new series, is because now that he has this new skill set he's been developing, I thought that the past Gray arc was probably the strongest part of this book. The world building, the actual things when you don't have an overpowered character, and injecting normal flaws and that type of character growth into someone that is starting fresh. It was super well done, and I found myself looking forward to every time that we flashed back to it. And the way that it resolved in this one, I thought was extremely well done. I mean, there were some character flaws that I found with Arthur that was more than a little annoying. Just the sheer ignoring of Nico and just trying to keep the good thing that's happening, but in the context of him at the character at that time, it made sense and left a lot of room for character growth. And the last 10-15% of the book, I'd say after they all meet together and after they had lost the castle and were headed back to rescue Tessia and have the final showdown. Final showdown was really cool, and seeing Arthur break into the ether arts and go against that big confrontation that he had with Elijah/Nico, just really well done. I thoroughly enjoyed that part, and even though I was kind of lukewarm on a lot of this book, when I got to the end of it, turtleme knows how to finish strong, and I found it very enjoyable. And he does what I think he does best, and I'm now very much excited to see what's going to happen for the next book, because he set everything up in such a way where it's like, I gotta know what happens next. Getting into some of the things I didn't like, and I had to sit down with this for a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of when I was experiencing this book was not ideal times for me to just objectively look at it and just judge it off of its own merits. So I'm trying to separate out what was annoyance from the book writing itself versus the just situation that I found myself in. And when I try to put together why I was getting annoyed at it, I had mentioned it earlier in some of my videos for this series, is that with progression fantasy, generally you have a few different things that you have to overcome on. A chronic problem of this genre is that if you make a perfect character that's always getting more powerful and is constantly having the power and knowledge to just completely dunk on everybody, then it's going to get boring after a while, because you can't have 10 books of someone just absolutely dunking on everybody with no issues or no other problems without it just kind of being oh well, of course he managed to pull the rabbit out of the hat. We always knew that he was going to be doing it, so you just lose the stakes and you're trying to carry through a series. For me, at least, it just gets monotonous and boring, and you want some more compelling things. And turtleme, I think, as he's improved as a writer, has really figured this out. But I think the way that he started set up some issues. Arthur, we've had him compared against other characters that are now much more overpowered than him, but up until this book, he, having lived 2 lives and being the king in his former life, he has had perspective and competence well beyond the character that he would be in his normal body, like a normal 18-year-old. Despite, having power gaps to overcome, he's generally been a very competent, capable character. And so in this book, you need a character to have flaws to overcome, and that character growth, or find other ways to make it not boring. In this case, that turtleme decided that we're going to push the character growth portion of it, but to me the problem was that there wasn't a lot of places for Arthur to go. One of the issues that has been shown earlier on that I think has been like more and more addressed, but you can't be that same horse, is his aloof and coldness. We're starting to see the hints of that, or where that came from in his like former life, but in this book I guess it was decided that we needed something more than that just to push his character growth forward. And so we have him very apathetic towards the war. He just wants to save his family and he doesn't really care about what happens with everyone else, and just starts making these like really immature, impulsive decisions that don't make a lot of sense, especially given the context that he was a leader of men. He was a king in his former life. He's had like 2 lifetimes to sort of figure things out and learn how to make moral, well-rationed choices. And I get in this book we needed to have a Darkest Night type situation. We're book 7 in there. We needed the story just from a plot point to like really hit a low, so that way that it can just rise from the phoenix to the axis, and for the series to really culminate in a good way, we needed it to hit rock bottom in that way. That's general plot beat. It makes a lot of sense, and for it to continue to have that like story arc where it finishes really strong, it needed to happen. We got trained for 6 books to expect competence and rationality out of Arthur, to then just throw it all out the window. Him just refusing to take command due to trauma makes sense, but then just to immediately abandon any sort of battle formation and basically commit treason, a lot of it just seemed out of character and forced for that character in general. Now that got us to the place that we needed for the plot, where I'm pretty confident that he can now take this and finish the series strong, but just having that juxtaposition of 2 things, it was super jarring for me, and a lot of things I just wasn't a huge fan of the setup for. But it was just interesting. The writing was markedly improved, and it was objectively better than some of the other books. You're reading what started out as progression fantasy genre, and the shift between what we had to now was just a little bit jarring. We didn't have a lot of progression fantasy elements in this book. It was much more epic fantasy, and while I understand that we needed to get to that point, I don't know. It's hard for me to say if that's like valid criticism or not. A lot of those decisions, I just felt myself like really rolling my eyes for, because it was like, really, that's the decision we're gonna make? I'll have to reread this book at some point in a less chaotic time in my life and see if it actually holds up, but just from a subjective take on it, I just found myself kind of like, okay, well, I guess Arthur's gonna make the worst decision here, and he does. Now, all that being said, I still very much like this series, so I just thought that this book could have been much stronger than it actually was. The turtleme's writing is getting better book by book. I just think he has put himself into a bit of a corner where you weren't going to be able to make a smooth transition to get the series where it needed to be. Now that we made this transition, though, I do have very high hopes for the next couple of books. We are set up in a great position for Arthur to get stronger at the end of it when he had that weird meld with Sylvie. I'm assuming that that's going to unlock a bunch of new possibility. There's a bunch of unknowns, a bunch of loose threads, and that last 20% of the book was very excellent, and that's one of the reasons why I think the book as a whole could have been better, was because the last 20% of it was so well done that it just made me think that the first whatever percentage of it that I got annoyed by or wasn't a huge fan of could have been set up like that, and just, I like the series, so high expectations for it to deliver. I've said it a few times though, but I am very excited for turtleme to finish up this series and start something new. Some of the tools and tricks that he was using in this book was very well done, and his ability to write emotion and get into some of the most tender moments, that was the biggest improvement I think I saw with this book. I'm excited to see where it goes as a writer. Seeing the progress that has been made from book 1, it's pretty crazy just how much better he's gotten. And the whole idea that he started this off on like Top as a free like web serial and has proceeded to grow it out into his own like cool little indie thing, it's very impressive and extremely hard to do. So definitely props to him for getting this far. But hey, thanks to you guys for stopping by. Appreciate you taking the time out of the day to watch the video. I will be continuing with this series, though I think I will take a week or 2 before getting into the next book, just so I can give myself some time to make sure that I am subjectively positive for whatever happens next. And in the meantime, I think I'm going to get into Malazan again, and I have a few other books that I have copies of that I've been looking forward to getting into. And I want to start playing around with some more lore type magic system videos, or how this magic system works in this world, and you know, the lore of this, and diving more into the books rather than just here's my reaction to the book. I will likely do some videos like that for the beginning after the end, so you guys can look forward to that. But anyway, thanks for watching, and peace.